you're not.
But I think down deep, they know I'm not a lazy guy, because if there's ever a benefit, somebody calls me.
People remember Dean Martin as a non-throne king of stylish, a symbol with a glass of wine in his hand, half-mouthed smile, and a strangely carelessness. Under the Las Vegas spotlight, or in the classic Hollywood movies, he is the embodiment of a desirable life. A life of laughter, fame, and non-ending parties. He is the king of cool. The man seems to have everything. But that is the image that the public knows. Few people know that the man who lived such a brilliant life received a lonely and sad ending to the right Christmas. There are no friends, no laughter, only silence in a large mansion. It is said that for a long time before his heart stopped beating, Dean Martin's soul died. So what happened? Which horror event has enough strength to extinguish the fire of a legend turning trendy king into a suffering hermit? And that tragedy not only destroyed him alone, but also covered a shadow of his life. His most important wife, Jeanne Martin, tied them into a tearful destiny. Let's flip the last page in the life of a symbol to find a hidden tragedy that actually killed Dean Martin. A predictable tragedy. For the world, he is Dean Martin, the king of cool. A immortal symbol of elegance, a golden voice with lime martini in his hand, and a half-needed smile that melted the hearts of millions. His life under the spotlight is an endless party of fame, money, and friendship with other legends in the group, the Rat Pack. The image of Dean Martin is embodied for a perfect life, an American dream, where everything can achieve easily and full of manner. But behind that flashy stage is a private life, and in its center, during the golden years, Jeanne Martin. She is not only the second wife, a 24-year partner, but also a solid foundation for his family, the mother of 3 common children. With beauty, intelligence, and charm, Jeanne is the perfect piece for Dean's image, and he built one of the most admired families in Hollywood at that time. However, the story of tragic ending by Dean Martin and his wife is not a story of death at the same time. Their true tragedy is much deeper and persistent. It originated from a single fateful event. A common pain destroyed Dean's soul and covered a dark shadow to the last years of both of them. Whether the story is how serious it is to become a wound that never heals, shaping the end of a regret for a symbol and the most important woman in his life, even if they are no longer in the same step. Do you have your own answer yet? Continue to follow our story. The secret will be analyzed in detail the following: the origin of tragedy leading to the fall of an icon. The glamorous world of Dean Martin, seemingly unshakable, crumbled entirely on March 21st, 1987. That was the day when his life and that of his former wife, Jeanne Martin, was plunged into an irreparable tragedy. Dean Paul Martin Jr., affectionately known as Dino, their 35-year-old son, perished in a military plane crash. Dino possessed striking good looks, a captivating voice, and an innate acting talent, all inherited from his famous father. In the 1960s, he was part of the popular pop rock band Dino Desi and Billy, achieving considerable success. Later, Dino pivoted to an acting career, and above all, pursued his passion for flying, becoming a pilot in the California Air National Guard. Yet it was this very passion that set the stage for an unavoidable chain of tragedy. At the time, Dino was on a routine training flight as a pilot for the California Air National Guard. Alongside his radar intercept officer, Lieutenant Ramon Ortiz, he was navigating stormy skies over the San Gorgonio Mountains in California. The weather was exceptionally harsh, with heavy rain, strong gusts, and severely limited visibility. While flying through the treacherous mountainous terrain, their F-4 Phantom II crashed into a mountainside, exploding and claiming both lives. For Dean Martin, Dino was not just a son, but an extension of himself, a source of immense pride, and the embodiment of hopes and dreams for a lasting legacy. The death of Dean Paul Martin Jr. delivered a devastating blow, tearing at the soul of an icon. Before this tragedy, Dean Martin epitomized elegance, effortless charm, and a life that appeared unruffled. He was the man millions aspired to be, or at least to share a moment with, always with a scotch in hand, a cigarette smoldering, and a witty quip ready on his lips. But that fateful day of March 21st, 1987 changed everything, reducing him to a shadow of his former self. This was not a sorrow that time could heal. It was a cruel, piercing pain that caused an emotional and spiritual paralysis from which Dean could never recover. Those closest to him, from Frank Sinatra to his daughters, recounted a haunting transformation. They said the light in his eyes went out a metaphor for the extinction of Dean Martin's spirit joy and innate optimism. His trademark smile, an inseparable part of the Dean Martin brand, vanished, replaced by a vacant, melancholic expression. He lost interest in everything that once brought him joy: the stage gatherings with friends, even the golf games he so cherished. This tragedy drove Dean into near-total seclusion. From a man who thrived in the spotlight, surrounded by friends and admirers, he became a recluse in his sprawling Beverly Hills mansion. He canceled countless performance contracts, including shows in Las Vegas, where he had been a lifelong fixture. For an artist like Dean, known for his professionalism and dedication to his audience, this was unprecedented. Abandoning the stage was not just quitting a job. It was relinquishing his identity, the very reason for his existence as an entertainment legend. Phone calls dwindled, visits from friends grew rare, not because they deserted him, but because Dean deliberately withdrew from everyone. He did not want anyone to see him in such a broken, vulnerable state. Once the epitome of strength and nonchalance, he now refused to let that image crumble in the eyes of others. He lived a solitary life, as if merely existing, passing the days in quiet isolation. The failed efforts of Frank Sinatra and friends. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin's closest friend and Dino's godfather, made every effort to pull Dean back into the light. Frank understood that the stage music and camaraderie were Dean's lifeblood. So, in 1988, he organized the Together Again tour, inviting Dean and Sammy Davis Jr. to reunite and recapture the golden days of the Rat Pack. This was not merely a business venture. It was an act of friendship, a heartfelt attempt to save Dean. But even the strongest bonds could not overcome his grief. Dean reluctantly joined the initial performances. However, his presence on stage was a mere shadow of his former self. His vacant gaze, lack of energy, and detached demeanor left audiences heartbroken. Gone were the effortless jokes and the graceful sipping of a drink on stage. Instead, there was only weariness and heaviness. Ultimately, Dean abandoned the tour, leaving Frank and Sammy to carry on without him. This decision not only disappointed fans, but also served as a stark indication that Dean could no longer find joy in what he once loved most. It was a painful testament to how deeply the loss of his son had consumed his spirit, leaving him unable and unwilling to continue a life without Dino. The impact of the tragedy extended beyond his emotional state, manifesting in Dean's physical decline and attitude toward his health. When diagnosed with lung cancer in 1993, Dean refused surgery, a choice that could have prolonged his life. This was not out of fear of the procedure or distrust in medicine. It was a sign of resignation, a loss of the will to fight. Like an ancient tree struck by lightning, he stood upright, but was hollow inside. His refusal of treatment was widely seen as an acceptance of fate, a way of letting go of a life he no longer cherished. Dino's death had not only robbed Dean of his joy, but also indirectly led to what seemed like a voluntary death, a release from unrelenting pain. Dean Martin's passing on Christmas Day, 1995, was not a sudden tragedy, but a sorrowful, predetermined end to a life that had lost its meaning nearly a decade earlier. Dean Martin's collapse after Dino's death is a painful reminder that even the brightest stars admired by the world are not immune to the deepest human sorrows. For Dean, his son's death was not just an event. It was a cataclysm that reshaped the rest of his life, transforming the King of Cool into a poignant image of loneliness and brokenness. It might seem that nothing could be more tragic for Dean Martin. Do you think so? Yet this was only the beginning. Heart-wrenching stories that will bring tears to your eyes still lie ahead. Don't turn away. Stay and hear the full depth of what he endured, and you'll feel even more. The final years in solitude. After the death of his son, Dean Martin's final years painted a stark contrast to the dazzling limelight he once inhabited. The King of Cool, once surrounded by laughter music and lavish gatherings, retreated into a shell of solitude, a voluntary but haunting isolation. No longer the life of the party or the center of attention, his world shrank to the confines of his sprawling Beverly Hills mansion, where he spent most of his time alone. Dean's days passed in monotonous melancholy. He woke late, ate simple breakfasts, and then immersed himself in his private world. The living room often echoed with the sounds of old Western films, a genre he loved playing on repeat on the television. He could watch the same movie multiple times as if seeking solace or a fleeting escape from harsh reality. This choice of entertainment mirrored the stagnation in his life. Nothing new, no exploration, just the repetition of what was familiar safe and required no social interaction. The phone rang less frequently, and visits from friends became rare, not because they turned their backs on him, but because Dean actively shunned contact. He refused to meet anyone unwilling to let others witness his decline. Dean Martin had always been a symbol of perfection and nonchalance. Allowing others to see his pain and vulnerability seemed unthinkable to him. The pride of a great star led him to bear his grief, alone shielding himself from prying or pitying eyes. Family members, particularly his daughters, struggled to reach and comfort him. Despite their efforts to visit and spend time with him, Dean often withdrew or remained distant. Perhaps he didn't want his children to see their father's pain, or perhaps he simply lacked the strength and spirit to maintain social bonds. This solitude wasn't merely a lifestyle choice. It was a profound psychological response to the trauma of loss, a way to shield himself from a world he felt had taken everything from him. The dual toll of physical and emotional pain. Alongside his emotional isolation, Dean Martin's physical decline was a clear manifestation of his surrender to life's battles. After Dino's death, Dean not only lost his zest for living, but also seemed to abandon any concern for his health or appearance. The man once known for his dashing figure and stylish demeanor became gaunt, weary, and frail. Despite decades of smoking and late-night revelry, Dean had maintained remarkable resilience. But the tragedy of losing his son changed everything. His reclusive lifestyle, lack of physical activity, and apparent surrender to fate caused his health to deteriorate drastically. The culmination of this decline was a lung cancer diagnosis in 1993, a serious condition requiring immediate and aggressive medical intervention. Yet, in a decision both astonishing and heartbreaking, Dean refused surgery and most aggressive treatments. For most people facing a life-threatening illness, the instinct for survival would drive them to pursue every possible option. But Dean was different. His choice stemmed not from fear of surgery or distrust in modern medicine, but from a profound resignation. It reflected a brutal truth: he no longer cared for this life. His soul had perished with Dino, and his body's continued existence felt like a burden, a prolongation of pain. Dean's refusal of treatment shocked his family and friends. They pleaded and urged him to fight, but their efforts were in vain. He made his choice decisively, almost as a voluntary acceptance of a cruel fate. This revealed the depth to which the loss of his son had eroded his spirit, not only stealing his joy, but indirectly leading to a death that seemed like a release from relentless suffering. He no longer wished to cling to a life without his son's presence, a quiet, predestined departure. Dean Martin's passing on Christmas Day, December 25th, 1995, was not a sudden tragedy, but a sorrowful, almost foreordained end to a life that had lost its meaning nearly a decade earlier. It was a quiet exit in stark contrast to the thunderous applause and brilliant stage lights that had followed him throughout his career. He died at his Beverly Hills home at the age of 78 from acute respiratory failure. Though it seemed a natural death in old age for those who knew the pain Dean carried, since the loss of his son Dino, it was a release. It was not a dramatic, abrupt end, but a slow, fading like a candle that had exhausted its wax. There was no spectacle, no media throng. The world learned of his passing through brief news reports, while those closest to him had watched him gradually let go of life over years of wrestling with emotional torment. Dean's death on Christmas carried a cruel irony. A day meant for joy, togetherness, and hope became the day he left a fitting close for a life that had lost those very qualities. His funeral was private as he would have wished in his final years. There were no grand public eulogies or Hollywood fanfare, just family and a few cherished friends to bid him farewell. It was a fitting end for a man who had chosen to retreat from the world bearing his grief alone. Dean Martin's passing left an emptiness in the hearts of fans and the entertainment world, but for him, it was likely the final piece he could not find in life, torn by the tragedy of losing his son. His death was the ultimate confirmation of the haunting words he had spoken years before I died the day he did, the final years and departure of Jeanne Martin. While Dean Martin sank into solitude after the tragedy of losing their son, Jeanne Martin, his second wife, lived a different story, one of quiet endurance and lingering pain that endured for over 2 decades after Dean's death. Though divorced from Dean since 1973, their connection through Dean Paul Jr. was everlasting. Dino's death not only stole Dean's joy, but cast a heavy shadow over Jeanne's remaining years. Jeanne outlived Dean by 21 years, but those years offered no relief from grief. As a mother, the loss of her son was an incomparable wound. Unlike Dean, she did not fully withdraw into isolation, but her life became far more private. Jeanne avoided the public eye and the glamour she once shared with Dean during their marriage. Instead, She devoted her later years to her remaining family, her children and grandchildren. She found comfort in nurturing those bonds and striving for as peaceful a life as possible. Though the pain was ever present, Jeanne faced it with strength, refusing to let it consume her as it had Dean. On August 24, 2016, Jeanne Martin passed away at her Beverly Hills home at the age of 89. Her death closed a turbulent and tragic chapter of the Martin family story. Unlike Dean's, her passing did not draw headlines, but it held deep meaning. She was the wife who stood by Dean during the brightest years of his career, the mother who raised their children, including Dino, alongside him. Jeanne's death marked the end of a generation in the Martin family narrative, a story profoundly shaped by the tragedy of 1987. It was the closing of a circle of pain, a testament to how relentlessly loss can linger, whether one is famous or not. Though Dean and Jeanne were divorced, Dino's death created a tragic bond between them, one that never broke. Each carried that pain until their final days in their own way. The end-of-life tragedy of Dean and Jeanne was not their deaths in a literal sense, but how a single event, the loss of Dean Paul Martin Jr., robbed them of their spirits, shaping their final years with emptiness and regret. For Dean Martin, it was the complete downfall of an icon, a legend of charm and nonchalance. He chose to retreat into solitude, carrying his silent pain and rejecting all comfort or efforts to draw him back to life. His death on Christmas Day was not a random event, but a sorrowful release from a life that had long lost its deep meaning. Jeanne Martin, the former wife who remained Dino's mother, bore the weight of that pain for over 2 decades after Dean's passing. She embodied quiet resilience, moving forward for her loved ones while carrying an unhealable scar. Her death in 2016 marked the close of a sorrowful chapter, a generation grappling with an irreparable family tragedy. Their story is a profound reminder, especially for those who have faced life's highs and lows, that no fame, wealth, or status can shield us from the deepest human sorrows. The death of a child, whether to a celebrity or an ordinary person, is a devastating wound that can alter the entire course of a parent's life. It proves that wealth can buy material comfort, but not inner peace or a healed heart. Dean and Jeanne Martin, through their shared tragedy, left a legacy not in films or songs, but in a moving story of loss and its enduring impact. It is a haunting whisper of pain, of unbreakable family love, and of how life can test us to our core. A single tragedy bound them forever beyond their ended marriage, shaping a regret-filled conclusion to both their lives.